On today's edition of the show, we're going to discuss whether we have an issue with the Florida Panthers touching the Prince of Wales trophy after clinching their spot in the Stanley Cup Final. Bill Zito has been named a finalist for a specific award. And how clutch was Matthew Tkachuk in the conference final? He is in some elite company when it comes to NHL postseason history.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, May 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers and on Instagram as well at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers, whether you have been here from the start last month, 30 days ago, or just listening to the first time to Locked On Panthers. And shout out to all you guys for coming back here and getting your daily Florida Panthers fix. So before we start today's show, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping. And, like I said, when it comes to everydayers and coming back here, a little bit of an opportunity to reintroduce myself. As Jay-Z says in one of his songs, allow me to reintroduce myself. Been working in sports media for the last 11 years. Started right out of high school working in golf media for the last 8 years, from 2012 all the way to 2020. And then, of course, with NBC Universal relocating out of the city of Orlando to Connecticut, I had an opportunity to transition my work from golf to hockey. And boy, has it been great to start covering the Florida Panthers, a team that I grew up more like in my late teens cheering for. Started cheering for this team in 2012. And the reason why I started becoming a fan was because when they broke their 12-year playoff drought from 2000 to 2012 of not making the postseason. And South Florida native as well from West Kendall. Shout out to everybody specifically from the hammocks. If you are from that area, shout out to you guys, and grateful to be coming to you guys each and every day to talk about the state of the Florida Panthers. But it is Friday, so that means it is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick Fairbanks is back, and this is our first official, if you don't count the post-game show from yesterday, our first official Stanley Cup Final edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick, welcome back to Fairbanks Friday. Great to have you here, my friend.
Thanks for having me back on, and I couldn't pick a better day to talk about the Stanley Cup Finals.
Oh, no doubt, my friend. I want to get your opinions on the Panthers finding a way to sweep the Carolina Hurricanes, and also ask you the question, do you have an issue with the Florida Panthers touching the Prince of Wales trophy?
I do not. I think that's one trophy that, it doesn't matter if you touch it or not. I think the last team that decided not to touch it was Tampa Bay, and they lost. Okay, so every team after that, whether it was Tampa again or Pittsburgh, those teams, it didn't matter. It really didn't. It didn't really affect the outcome. But what I really liked about the Panthers and what they did, you got to see how close that team was. All hugging each other the way they were and just touching the trophy itself. I don't get that feeling from a lot of teams. They're just athletes. They're just there because, they have to and everything. And I just feel like everybody in the locker room likes each other. And they all pulled rope during this postseason. And they've already gotten one trophy. They're not done yet. They have 4 more to go. They'll bring home the big prize after that.
Yeah, and this question I ask you is because I had someone comment on yesterday's edition of the show and asking if I had a problem with it. And I said no. I said I kept it a lot simpler. It's not the Stanley Cup. That's why I don't have an issue with it. And one thing that Paul Maurice said earlier in the postseason run is if you're just consistently business as usual and not smiling throughout the process, then why are you even here in the first place? So I think the fact that they're able to carry the trophy to the locker room and celebrate a little bit, and especially with the lack of expectations that this team had, all the injuries that they went through the first 60 plus games of the season, especially before they were even able to activate Anthony Duclair off LTIR as well, and the Panthers and having a tough time fitting into the system as far as wins coming together, and the fact that they grew together, they went through the thick of the mud too. Why I don't see a reason. I don't see a reason for them to not touch it. And once again, it's not the Stanley Cup, so that's why I don't have an issue with that. But but as far as the series, Nick, one thing that I didn't really discuss yesterday was when post game pressers. One of them was Rod Brind'Amour on the other side. Rod Brind'Amour was talking about how the Carolina Hurricanes didn't feel, paraphrasing here, they didn't feel like that they're destroyed in the series. He was on the ice. Every game was close. And then this is where it gets interesting. Steve Dangle tweeted saying, but if this was the Leafs, everybody would be attacking them for it. Number one, he's not wrong. Steve Dangle is. And number two, I agree with Rod Brind'Amour. Listen, it was a very tough series. I mean, games 1 and 2 could have gone either way. Thankfully, the Panthers, they were able to outpace the Carolina Hurricanes and get their legs going more. That has caused them to get the 2 overtime winners. And who knows? Momentum is real in sports. I know Paul Maurice doesn't necessarily believe in it, but you talk about that game 1 and how draining it must be for the Carolina Hurricanes side of things as well. And you could flip a coin. And this was a sweep that you really had to grind. So I don't have an issue with his comments there.
No, I just think the way that he probably phrased them was probably not the best, because he just said he kept saying we didn't get swept, and he kind of just kept talking after that. Now, if he would have said it doesn't feel like we got swept, even though we did, we were in every game. We only lost by a goal in each game. I definitely 100% agree with that. Carolina didn't play terribly at all. They were just on the unfortunate end of not getting bounces. I mean, it looked like they were getting bounces in the 4th game, but Florida had more bounces. And, Bob was making more saves than Anderson. So you still got swept, Brad. But, yes, it was a close series, even though everything went Florida's way.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, also with the fact that the Florida Panthers penalty kill in the series was outstanding, 12 of 14. The only ones the only ones they gave up were in game 1, where Bob didn't give up a goal at even strength, 55 of 55 at even strength there. And when one part of the Panthers game wasn't going well necessarily, another part of their game was. And to think that the Florida Panthers in the first round against the Boston Bruins, their PK was at 59%. So what a turnaround that this Panthers special teams was. And here's also an interesting stat for the Panthers and being in a playoff spot. The amount of days that the Panthers spent in a playoff spot in the season was 28% of the season. So you just got to get in. That it's the ultimate just get in sport. And we harped on it so many times. And honestly, Nick, the amount of times that we harped on it prior to the postseason starting, I felt like we were just beating the dead horse too much. But now that it's manifested, I don't feel too bad about beating that dead horse when it comes to the Panthers getting in and not your typical ace seed.
No, we could continue to beat that horse because I think hockey and to a lesser extent baseball are the only sports that I think that there's some parity when it comes to playoffs, and that once you get in, it's anybody's ball game. We talked about during the Boston series that, they had the best regular season ever, but what does that mean? what does that mean when postseason starts, when everybody's back to zero? It doesn't mean anything. It just means that you qualified to be one of 8 teams in this conference to move on. You're not promised anything after that. And, Florida took it to them. And, here we are. So some of the stats that you threw out are actually pretty amazing. So the last time I've heard 28% and the Florida Panthers being mentioned in the same sentence was when Pavel Bure was his first full season with the Panthers. His goal scoring, like all the goals that he scored, was 28% of Panthers' total goals that season, which is ridiculous. So,
Ridiculous.
Yeah, that's the first thing that came up. And then after that, we just got to keep manifesting. I'm very happy right now with winning the East. But as soon as that happened last night and they took the trophy back in the locker room, I was done, to be honest. And I think it's time to put our eyes on a bigger prize.
I like that, and it's actually a topic that we're going to get ahead in segment 3. But before that, we're going to, of course, transition to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about Bill Zito being a finalist for a certain award. We're gonna really dig deeper into Matthew Tkachuk and really ask the question: how clutch was he actually in the Eastern Conference Final? We are going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Bird Dogs. And I feel better when wearing Bird Dogs. And the Bird Dogs is something that you could take for a swim, on the golf course, to the beach. You can, and that's where I feel comfortable with Bird Dogs. Bert Kreischer smokes a cigar, is on the barbecue, and he's wearing his signature shorts. Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedonAHL and enter promo code LOCKEDONAHL, and you'll get a free Yeti-style cooler with your order. Once again, that is birddogs.com/lockedonAHL to get a free Yeti-style cooler when you enter promo code LOCKEDONNHL. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And once again, here on a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show with my good friend Nick Fairbanks here. And Nick, we didn't really, David and Lassiter and I did not really discuss this on the show yesterday because our focus was solely on the Panthers winning Game 4. But prior to Game 4, Bill Zito was nominated for the Jim Gregory Award, which is for GM of the Year, and this is his second time in 3 seasons that he's been nominated for this award. Thing is, for this award, and might have a few questions going into this about why is he nominated or why is he not. This award specifically is voted after the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, so that's the big difference. And for those listeners who are new and just getting into the sport and also listening to this podcast, let me recap to you guys what happened in the trade deadline. Nothing. Literally nothing for the Panthers. And why? Up against the cap, lack the assets. They don't have a first-round pick until 2026. And really on the cut line with being in the postseason versus not. And they were not in a position to tank. You can't tank next year. You can't tank the next year after. So, but the logic here is as well, the Florida Panthers getting here, and sometimes the logic can be, sometimes the best move you can make is not making one. And that I'll never forget his opening statement after the trade deadline in his press conference, not giving up on the team, not giving up on the fans. But I felt like he should have won this award a few years ago. In all honesty, I think it was 2021 when he made the acquisition of Sam Bennett, Brandon Montour in the same trade deadline. I thought he should have won it then, because the Panthers, they overachieved that year. Remember, in the 56 game season, I thought they were going to be a bubble team, and they ended up being second place in the Central Division before losing to the Tampa Bay Lightning in 6. But what says you about Bill Zito and his being a finalist for the Jim Gregory Award for GM of the Year?
It's deserved, and it's deserved both times he's been nominated. I think in 2021, he got his hands on this team, is really trying to restructure or kind of understand like what this team is going to be going forward, and also give them some flexibility on what they can be, either moving out contracts or getting younger guys with term, so that he doesn't have to worry about negotiating new contracts and everything. So, I mean, he got Carter Verhaeghe, right? You said Montour and Sam Bennett. Oh my! Don't say Sam Bennett in Toronto right now, or Carolina and Raleigh, but he has definitely deserved the last 2 years. And you said it correctly. The best move that he made this season was not to make one, but he made a pretty big one at the start of last season during the off season in acquiring Matthew Tkachuk. So. You don't see GMs go out there and actually try to alter their team or shake it up like they do with a massive trade that he pulled off. Sending out a fan favorite in Jonathan Huberdeau, a first-round pick, a top prospect in Uyghur for just Matthew Tkachuk and probably a fourth-round draft pick, that's franchise altering, and we've seen it now. And then secondly, to go the complete opposite way, no, we like our guys. We're not going to do anything. We believe in this team, and that's the big thing. And I think that's the biggest thing that we should also take away from that press conference, is that we believe in these guys. We believe in the team. They went on a run after that, and look where they're at now. I think everybody's bought in, everybody's believing, and it's from top down in the organization. So it's really nice to see everybody doing their part and all on the same page.
Yeah, and And the fact, and once that trade deadline happened, of course, the very first game was the Panthers. I'll never forget that first game after the trade deadline. It was welcoming in the Pittsburgh Penguins to town, and then they got healthy at the right time too. Because right before that, Sam Bennett and Alexander Barkov were missing from the lineup. They were having Eric Stahl being on that second line too. I remember being at that Tampa Bay game, and it was a 4-1 victory. The Panthers get their goals. 3 of them in the first period. There's also one disallowed there right prior to that, and then they go ahead and destroy the Pittsburgh Penguins on that Saturday. But even the day prior, they lose to Nashville. In the span of a few weeks, they lose twice to Nashville, who sold a lot during the trade deadline. So we were all confused as well about where that team was, and now of course that 6-game winning streak towards the end helped, and even the 6-game winning streak prior to the 4-game losing streak too helped. Put the Panthers where they are. But also really, I also want to discuss really about the Panthers and what when it comes to Matthew Tkachuk and his conference final performance, every single game-winning goal Matthew Tkachuk was involved in. First one in game 1, 12 seconds in left in quadruple overtime. He scores the game winner off the turnover. Game 2, less than 2 minutes in, he scores. Game 3, he's the one that sets up Sam Reinhart on the power play, gets the primary assist to beat Carolina 1-0, and then of course 4.9 seconds left on the power play to clinch their spot in the Stanley Cup Final. Do you know when was the last time a player had 3 game-winning goals in a conference final? Nick, do you want to take a guess?
I'm going to probably have to go with I don't know I'm going to say the team that I think it is. I'm probably not going to know the player. But I have to think that it's probably somebody from either the New Jersey Devils or the LA Kings. That's what I think.
Sid the Kid, 2016, Eastern Conference Final.
Respect.
So 2016 in their route to the Stanley Cup Final, where they beat the San Jose Sharks that year. And the company that Matthew Tkachuk is in with those 3 game-winning goals, and just I heard that stat today. I'm like, wow, that's incredible for what Matthew Tkachuk has done. And also one cool thing about last night is Keith Tkachuk also took a picture with the fans over at Section 103 who brought their mouth guards and had them fish hooked there. So that was a really cool feature. And also Keith Tkachuk about how animated he was. And of course, we knew how animated he was prior to even the Toronto game in the regular season. But Matthew Tkachuk, just great company that he's in. But I know. In my opinion, Bob is still the favorite to win the Conn Smythe if the Florida Panthers do win the Cup. Of course, 160 of 174 on the series. But how much of a case does Matthew Tkachuk have with how he's performed in this series? Yeah, he didn't have any goals in the second round series against Toronto, but he was consistently an agitator, taking away the Toronto Maple Leafs' best players, and of course putting it all on display in the conference final. How much of a case does Matthew Tkachuk have?
So I liken this as a goalie tandem. So you have Bobrovsky as 1A right now, and then you have Matthew Tkachuk. I can't even say his name now, as 1B. The reason being is that both players have put the Panthers on their back and carried them to where they are now. They would not be where they are without the other. Matthew Tkachuk would not have the chance to score game-winning goals if Bob hasn't played the way he has. And Tkachuk getting them through the first series against Boston and basically saying, like, we're going to be back here for 7. That's guts. And, he is the team leader right now. He's like the heart and soul, and he's proving it. He's proving it in the locker room. He's proving it on the ice. But to me, Bob, by far, is the reason why Florida is where they are. And nobody saw this coming at all. I mean, everybody thought Bob was dead, to be honest. Like, they didn't think he was a first-rate goalie anymore. Like, he was on the back half of his career. And to see him do this, something that we haven't seen in 20 years since Jaguar, this might be better than that. And the only way that it will be better than his run is if they do this.
For those not watching on the YouTube, I'm going to describe the motion that Nick Fairbanks just did, the lifting of the cup. And Nick, on my Spotify the other day, the song from the commercial, Kiss Me, came up, and I'm like, no, I could not hear this song the same. No. That commercial is just played so many times that it's just like, I gotta chillax when it comes to hearing that song. Maybe if it does actually happen, I won't care anymore from listening to that song. But for now, I'm giving that song a rest because of how many times I hear that on the television when watching the Stanley Cup playoffs. But we're going to transition to segment number 3, where we're going to talk about players and short memories, or even long memories even. And we're going to talk about the possibility of when the Stanley Cup Final could begin. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel and make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA and Stanley Cup playoffs. Right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. There's no better place to bet on the playoff action than at America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Segment number 3 here on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick Fairbanks is here for another edition of the show. And going to start off with the Stanley Cup Final and the possibility of when it'll start. There was a tweet by John Buccigross about what he was hearing about the schedule, and said that if Vegas and Dallas goes more than 5 games, and just to give everyone a sense of when we're recording this, right now puck drop hasn't happened at the time of recording between Vegas and Dallas, so we don't know the result yet. So you guys will know by the time this drops. So if it goes more than 5 games, Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final will begin on June 3rd in Vegas. So that's a Saturday. If it ends at 5, and honestly, I want the Stanley Cup Final to start earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully Dallas can string out a win tonight and, you know, get an extra game out of Vegas if they so happen to win. That's just but if it ends 5 or less, game 1 will be next Wednesday, May 31st in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
But also the Panthers, they're gonna have a week off again, and we saw how it didn't affect them this time around. They still played very sharp, and a lot of credit goes to Sergei Bobrovsky once again. Got a 3-week break before he started a game again. When coming in for Alex Lyon, he's getting his rest too and performing well. This guy is just so locked in, and also short memories too. He has a short memory when it comes to when he's not performing at his best. And also outside of Sergei Bobrovsky, you know who's the one player that I could appreciate when it comes to short memory on the team, when it comes to moving on from winning the Eastern Conference? It's Sam Reinhart.
Mm-hmm.
That's as far as even keeled, as far as the skaters, Sam Reinhart is another example for that. And I can understand why. The career that Sam Reinhart had prior to this, with being the second overall pick right behind Aaron Ekblad, being in a very difficult situation in Buffalo with not making the postseason, and then of course when he did have his best season without Jack Eichel, it still wasn't resulting in wins and playoff appearances. So this is a part of his career where he's just hungry. He's hungry to win. He is taking this very seriously, of course, as all players should. But I could really appreciate him and him being even keeled in this situation, even though you're less than, when he spoke to the media, it was not even 12 hours after the fact that they won the Prince of Wales trophy.
So there's a couple things that are going on there, and I'm really glad that you're bringing this up and that he was able to talk about this today. Since game, I want to say 5 of the first round, Paul Maurice said that there's some freeing aspect of, you know, playing in elimination games, because you know what, you can just go out and play your game and, you know, hopefully you'll get the better result, and they did. But then that really loosened the whole team up for this whole run. I mean, there's never been one point that I thought they were going to lose games or that they weren't going to come back. We gave Toronto one. Okay. But now to go into a series with Carolina, which, you know, I think you and I predicted was going to go 6 or 7, and they're much more of a they were just a better team, and we were going to have a lot more struggles with them. We unfortunately didn't, because I wanted to go 7. That would have been epic. But it's done. Everything's done and over. Your main goal right now is to get 4 more wins and lift the cup. This is what everything is. This is what everything is amounted to. Play free. Take it one game at a time. Take it one day at a time, even if you're not playing. But just get your rest, get your recuperation, get your practice in, and then once the Stanley Cup, starts, it's on. And, if it's going to be Vegas, there's going to be Dallas. It's going to be a tough series either way. So I like their mentality going in, and you have to have a short memory. And they've been playing with that since game 5 of the first round. And just like they've been playing playoffs since January, just keep doing what you're doing and you'll find success.
Yeah. And the fact that the Panthers really, even in their 4-game losing streak in March, that they were able to just not keep themselves down after that, and still able to rebound from it, and still just never throw in the towel there. And I want to go back, continue the conversation about memories and moving on and all that stuff. And Jonathan Marchessault of the Vegas Golden Knights was asked about, of course, everything that happened with the expansion draft and Dale Talon and all. And this was this was a screenshot that Dave Lassiter put in our chat saying Marchessault, quote, Marchessault was convinced at the time that he would be protected by Florida, but in addition to seeking cost savings on Smith contract, the Panthers also wanted to protect defenseman Alex Petrovich, Mark Pysyk from the expansion draft. Justified at the same time, you win championships with defense first, close quote. And Dale Talon's somewhat right in the defensive front of it, but how many times were fans complaining about Alex Petrovich when he was with the Florida Panthers? And before the expansion draft of the Seattle one, I asked you and Jacob if you guys remembered all the names of the guys from the Vegas expansion draft who were on the protected list. And I remember you said, don't do this, Armando. So I'm not going to ask you to guess this time around. So for a reminder of people who have of the protection list, Alexander Barkov, Jonathan Huberdeau, Vincent Trocheck, Mark Pysyk, Alex Petrovich, James Reimer, Aaron Ekblad, and Nick Bjugstad. Crazy enough, only two players remain from that. Of course, Trocheck was traded for Eetu Luostarinen. Thanks, Dale. Nick Bjugstad was traded for cap space to create the signing for Sergei Bobrovsky as well.
Yep.
James Reimer was traded for Scott Darling, who was eventually bought out as far as signing Sergei Bobrovsky as well.
Mm-hmm.
So all that for just a year later, this Florida Panthers team turned so many different things around. This was even before the GM change. And of course, Marchessault was on the Vegas Golden Knights. And of course he was very animated in that one series where the Vegas Golden Knights had a 5-minute major against San Jose, and they gave up, I believe it was 4 goals on that 5-minute major in a game 7. And he was I'll never forget how Marchessault was animated there. But of course, don't give up 4 goals also on a 5-minute major. That's a lot to give up, even in 5 minutes. Even though the cross check to the head was very questionable to begin with.
Yes.
But listen, it worked out for both teams here. It took a while for the Panthers. Took a GM change, and it took a lot of turnover too. I mean, Dale Talon, regardless, and once in a while when I go to games in the press box, I will see Dale Talon there. And he still has a very good fingerprint on this team, regardless of everything that we've had to say negatively about him and how he managed the cap as well. Of course, Keith Yandel was not to mention Keith Yandel was also on that protection list as well with the no movement clause as well. We of course we don't like that contract as well. That him and Tom Rowe got from the New York Rangers, but also he still has a big fingerprint on how this Panthers team got to where they were. So I don't hold any grudges against Dale Talon at all. If anything, I'm thankful for the building blocks that he put. And this isn't the first time that he's done it as far as a team reaching to a certain point. I mean, it happened in Chicago. He was not part of those 3 championships for the Chicago Blackhawks, but he was part of building the foundation to where those Blackhawk teams got to for winning the cup.
Definitely. And I'll go back to the expansion draft because there's a couple of storylines that I don't know if a lot of people were really aware of. So number one, the Panthers and Jonathan Marchessault during that terrible season with Tom Rowe as GM and as coach, terrible decision, by the way, for that as well.
Yep.
Marchessault wanted $5 million for like 5 years. Ownership didn't want to give him that. So I think the idea of him saying that he was going to be protected, Panthers weren't going to pay him. So they let him go. And there was also internal issues with Riley Smith with his conduct. And if anything, that kind of goes against what he tries to say about how bad Florida is. He does not really have kind things to say, about, I wouldn't say the fan base, but that we don't really show up and that Florida is really not like a good place to play hockey. And my thing is that, he played very well here. He had a lot of really, jaw-dropping goals that he had. I mean, he was one of the first ones that I've seen that would take the puck between his legs and, put it in the back of the net. That's like his signature, like Tkachuk. But there were more than one, thing. Like Dale had to kind of clean up after Rowe, And Dale probably didn't want some of the guys that Rowe brought in. He wanted to be tougher. He wanted to be bigger. And it took a while. It took 4 or 5 years for the Panthers to get over this, but look where we are now. And we're reaping the benefits of, a hot goalie, some of the framework that Dale still has. And one thing that I don't know if I mentioned it here, but Dale is the reason why Florida is even still on the map. He was able to bring in some Blackhawk players that were part of that first championship and brought them in. Yep. And started that identity. Like, Florida didn't have anything. Their superstars were homegrown, but then they all left. And now you have guys that actually can play hard, gritty hockey when it matters. And he just started making this a haven for players to come play or re-energize their careers. And I think a lot of people started gravitating towards that. And, it's always been exciting since that happened. Did he make some bad decisions? Of course. But, there's more in the lines of things of what was going on there. I mean, like I said, contract with Marchessault, the negotiations wasn't going well. Riley Smith was having some internal problems, outside of the team and also inside the team. And then, maybe Petrovic. I call him Petrovic because, he messed me up on that one. I know he changed it because of his his grandfather, but he's always been Petrovic to me. He maybe only had 1 or 2 games that were really good with the Panthers, and one of them was a playoff game. But other than that, I'm surprised he's still around right now. He just was not serviceable, unfortunately. And, sometimes we make mistakes, but it's how we rebound from them is what matters.
That is ultimately what matters when it comes to that. And of course, Pysyk was of course the hybrid. He played both forward and defenseman when needed. So of course, his versatility is a reason why he was protected as well. So a big opportunity for Pysyk to make a more impact on this team. But and the Panthers, Dave, we question whether they were ever going to recover from this, and they certainly have. It took a while, and it took 3 coaches in between as well.
Yes,
between all that, in Bugner, Quenneville, Brunette, of course, with circumstances as well. Of course, with everything in between, and look where they are now in the Stanley Cup Final. And boy, can I cannot wait till Game 1, whenever that may be. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me once again on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And next Friday, when you come on, we will be preparing for maybe a Game 1 on June 3rd or a Game 2 heading into next Friday's show. So tell everybody where they can follow you online.
Armando, as always, thank you for having me on all season, especially on Fridays. They've been great. More wins than losses. And, we've had a lot of drama this season, so I'm just glad we are where we are. I do want to leave everybody with this one point before I tell everybody where they can find me, is that a lot of Toronto, Boston, and now Carolina fans are not happy with Florida moving on. And they think that just because Chicago beat Pittsburgh is the reason why Florida's in. You could say that about any game during the season that Pittsburgh lost, okay? It's not just that last game. Pittsburgh was not consistent at all. They weren't healthy most of the time. And unfortunately, they just could not get it together. So, to Steve Dangle, to the Boston Bruin fans, and now the Carolina fans, like, Florida is where they are because they deserve to be, and they earned it, okay? Don't take anything away from these guys just because your team's failed to show up, number one. And number two, because you're going to blame the Pittsburgh Penguins for losing a game to the Chicago Blackhawks when didn't Florida destroy them after the trade deadline? So maybe that was the game that really put Florida in the playoffs instead of the one against Chicago. So I just wanted to give that because I'm tired of seeing it, and I'm tired of people just bringing their teams into it saying, oh, we would have gone farther or whatever. But no, Florida deserves to be where they are. And if you guys like what I just said, you can follow me on Twitter at Prudential0. So thank you again for having me on.
Mic drop right there.
Yeah.
Great ending to this Fairbanks Friday. So Nick, thank you so much once again, and I will see you next week, my friend.
See you next week.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for the everydayers, make sure to come back on Monday's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where we might know an opponent by the time Monday hits. We could know more about the Stanley Cup final schedule, and we could be having once again a special guest on this show to talk more about the Florida Panthers playoff run. So I'm Armando Velez with Nick Fairbanks, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.